Welcome to our deep dive on the history of eugenics.
Eugenics.
Yeah.
It's a
I know, right?
it's a pretty fascinating and complicated one.
It is.
And we have a lot of sources here, ranging from like Plato to modern genetic technologies.
Yeah, we do.
It's a
very big topic.
It is.
And our mission with this deep dive is to really kind of unpack, how this concept went from what seemed to be like a scientific pursuit to something much more troubling.
Yeah, well, I think what's really striking about eugenics is that it wasn't just some like fringe idea.
Right.
It was something that really captured the minds of like intellectuals and scientists and policymakers all over the globe for decades.
Yeah, and that's what's so unsettling to me is like how a concept that's, aimed at improving humanity could, through selective breeding, could take such a dark turn.
Yeah.
And to understand how deeply this idea like permeated society, we need to travel back in time.
Yeah.
All the way to ancient Greece.
Oh, wow. That's a big jump.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of surprising how far back these ideas go.
Okay.
Plato, in his Republic, he touches upon this idea of selective breeding for humans.
Really?
To create like this superior society.
Wow. I had no idea that the roots of this concept went that far back. So even in ancient times, people were pondering like how to engineer the ideal society.
Exactly.
Wow.
So while the term eugenics didn't exist yet, those early musings really laid the groundwork for what would become a global movement.
Okay, so fast forward to the 19th century.
Okay.
And that's where we have Francis Galton enter the picture, right?
Yes.
Charles Darwin's cousin.
Yes.
He's the one who coined the term eugenics.
That's right.
Right.
Yes, and his book, Inquiries into Human Faculty and Its Development, really popularized this concept.
Okay.
And it really draws on the Greek word EU, which means good or noble.
Okay.
And genos meaning birth.
So good birth. Basically making sure that the only people that are deemed fit are the ones that reproduce.
Yeah.
But Galton's idea went beyond just encouraging the fit to have more children.
That's right. Right.
He also advocated for what we call negative eugenics.
Okay.
Which is like actively preventing or discouraging reproduction among those considered unfit.
Okay.
And often through really drastic measures.
Oh, wow.
Like forced sterilization or segregation.
And these ideas, they gained traction quickly. I mean, it's hard to believe that such a controversial concept could become so mainstream.
Yeah, it did.
All right.
And it's really, particularly in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, you see organizations like the Eugenics Education Society, founded in 1907, really dedicated to spreading these ideas. And they even attracted figures like Winston Churchill.
Churchill? Wow. I mean, I would think that he would be more concerned with like,
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Winning wars and
Right, but it just shows you
how widely accepted.
Wow.
And even like fashionable.
Yeah.
These ideas became in certain circles.
It's unsettling how quickly a scientific concept can be twisted to serve agendas that, looking back are just downright terrifying.
That's what makes this history so important to understand. Like, take Darwin's theory of evolution.
Okay.
Groundbreaking, but it was also very susceptible to misinterpretation and manipulation.
What do you mean? How did Darwin's ideas get tied up with eugenics?
Well, some people latched onto what they called the dark side of Darwinism.
Okay.
And this was the fear that humans could, like, regress or degenerate back to a more primitive state.
So, like, evolution in reverse.
Yeah.
Like, all of the progress that humans had made just goes down the drain.
Yeah, and this really played into the anxieties of the time.
Right.
Like, you had rapid industrialization, social change, and this perceived threat of the lower classes.
Right.
So eugenics was presented as a way to control evolution, to steer humanity away from this supposed decline.
It sounds like a recipe for social control.
Yes.
Using science as a justification to target certain groups.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened.
Wow.
Eugenics took root globally.
Right.
But its manifestations varied depending on the cultural context.
So it wasn't like a one-size-fits-all movement.
Not at all.
Oh.
Like in Romania, the Orthodox clergy were involved in promoting eugenic ideas.
Okay.
But in Croatia, they adapted these ideas to fit within Catholic doctrine and nationalistic sentiment.
Religion and eugenics. That's an unexpected pairing.
It is.
Wow.
But it really highlights the adaptability of eugenics and its ability to like morph and mold itself to fit various cultural and political agendas.
Wow.
Another intriguing example is Saxon eugenics, where you had this guy named Dr. Heinrich Sigmund, and he focused on increasing the population of the fittest. And he specifically was interested in the Nordic race.
Ah, so the myth of racial superiority rears its ugly head again.
Yes, and it demonstrates how pseudoscience can be weaponized to justify prejudice and discrimination. Sigmund saw threats to the Saxon racial stock everywhere, from the declining birth rate among the fittest to what he perceived as the dangers of, like, interracial marriage.
So diversity was seen as a threat to racial purity. It's like they're trying to turn back the clock on human evolution.
Yeah, that's a key takeaway.
Wow.
You know, this inherent contradiction of eugenics claiming to be about progress while simultaneously clinging to these archaic ideas about racial hierarchy and purity.
Okay, so eugenics is spreading globally.
Yes.
Where does Russia fit into all this?
So Russia...
I mean, weren't they experiencing a lot of political upheaval at the time?
Yeah, they were. And that might explain why Russia was a bit late to the eugenics game. It wasn't really until after the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 that they began to seriously engage with the concept.
So even amidst a revelation and societal transformation, these ideas still found a foothold.
Yeah, it's a testament to the pervasiveness of eugenics in the early 20th century. And while Russia didn't have a strong eugenic movement, figures like Nikolai Damaleya, a prominent bacteriologist, recognized the importance of understanding its impact.
What was his take on all this? Was he a supporter or a critic?
Well, he was very aware of the problems eugenics was causing in other cultures. And he believed that even if Russia wasn't actively embracing this movement, they needed to be informed about its global spread and potential consequences.
It sounds like he was kind of a voice of reason in a sea of, like, increasingly troubling ideas.
He was. He even published the first Russian journal. That was dedicated to discussing eugenic issues. So he really highlighted this need for critical engagement with this concept, even if it wasn't like a major force in Russia at the time.
This global spread of eugenics is incredibly unsettling. But I think we need to address the elephant in the room. The Nazi regime.
You're right. It's impossible to discuss eugenics without confronting its most horrific manifestation, which was the Nazis' twisted interpretation that fueled their campaign of terror.
This is a dark chapter, but I think it's crucial to understand how eugenics could be so horribly distorted. Where do we even begin?
So the Nazis, obsessed with this idea of like a master race, they took eugenics to its most extreme and horrific conclusion. And it really started with the 1933 sterilization law that targeted those deemed unfit to reproduce, a chilling echo of policies that had been enacted in the United States.
The forced sterilizations were just the tip of the iceberg.
Tragically, yes. Think individuals with disabilities, mental illness. Those from marginalized groups, hundreds of thousands were sterilized under this law.
It's horrifying that this was happening in a country with such a rich scientific history. How could they go from groundbreaking discoveries to such barbarity?
It's a stark reminder of how easily science can be manipulated to serve dangerous ideologies. And as the war intensified, the Nazi regime shifted from sterilization to a horrific euthanasia program.
Euthanasia, that chilling euphemism for mass murder. It's hard to even fathom.
This program was framed as a way to free up resources during wartime. And it began with children. The Children's Euthanasia Program, launched in 1939, resulted in the systematic killing of thousands of children deemed unworthy of life.
It's heartbreaking. The cruelty is just, it's incomprehensible. How could they target the most vulnerable members of society?
Well, you know, this program eventually expanded to target adults deemed unfit. And, you know, it was a slippery slope that ultimately paved the way for the Holocaust. The systematic extermination of millions of Jews, Roma, LGBTQ plus individuals, and others.
The sheer scale of the Nazi atrocities is almost too much to bear.
It is a dark stain on human history, and it's really a testament to the devastating consequences of unchecked power, fueled by distorted scientific ideas.
And sadly, the legacy of eugenics didn't end with the fall of the Nazi regime.
No, it didn't.
Oh, there's more. This is getting heavy.
I know, it is.
Okay.
It's a lot to process, but, understanding the full scope of this history is vital.
Right.
So let's shift our focus to the U.S., where eugenic ideas also had a profound impact, shaping policies and leading to the suffering of many.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay.
I have a feeling this is going to be just as unsettling as the Nazi connection.
You're not wrong.
Okay.
So the first sterilization law in the U.S. was enacted in 1907.
In Indiana.
The 1907. That's shocking.
Yeah.
It seems like the U.S. was ahead of the curve when it came to implementing these horrific policies.
This law set a dangerous precedent.
Okay.
And it ignited a wave of similar legislation across the country.
Wow.
And by the 1930s, over 30 states had passed sterilization laws targeting individuals deemed unfit to reproduce.
It's just chilling how this idea of unfit was so easily applied to vulnerable populations.
It is. And to understand the U.S. eugenics movement, we need to look at the degeneracy theory.
Degeneracy theory, what's that all about?
Well, this theory attributed social problems like poverty or crime to supposed hereditary defects.
Oh, so instead of addressing like social issues, they were framed as biological problems that could be bred out of the population.
You got it.
Wow.
And this thinking really permeated American society.
Okay.
It influenced everything from policy to, disturbingly, academia.
Wait, academia? You mean they were teaching eugenics in universities?
Yeah, by 1928.
Wow.
Over 350 universities in the U.S. offered courses on eugenics, reaching over 20,000 students.
Wow. That is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
How could something so fundamentally flawed become part of the academic curriculum?
Well, at the time, figures like Charles Davenport, a prominent biologist, played a key role in promoting eugenics as legitimate science. He founded the Eugenics Record Office, which collected massive amounts of data on American families, attempting to link social traits to heredity.
So he was trying to create like a genetic database to prove his theories.
Exactly.
Wow.
But his work was deeply flawed and criticized for its blatant racial bias. He believed in the inherent superiority of the Nordic race, reinforcing existing prejudices against people of color, immigrants, those deemed socially deviant.
This is starting to feel like a broken record. Eugenics, racism, forced sterilization. Yeah.
It's a vicious cycle.
It is, and unfortunately, another key figure in this cycle was Harry H. Laughlin. He was a strong advocate for sterilization. And he even drafted a model sterilization law that was implemented in several states. But here's where it gets even more disturbing.
Oh, no, don't tell me. He was connected to the Nazis, wasn't he?
You guessed it. Laughlin actually advised the Nazi regime on their eugenics program.
Oh, wow.
He even accepted an honorary degree from Heidelberg University, which was under Nazi control at the time.
So American eugenicists were directly involved with the Nazi atrocities?
It highlights the interconnectedness of the eugenics movement, how these ideas were exchanged and reinforced across borders, ultimately contributing to the horrors that unfolded in Nazi Germany.
This is just mind-blowing, the scope of it all.
It is a lot to take in.
It is.
I know. And before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, we need to touch on another key area where eugenic ideas had a profound impact. The Immigration Restriction Act of 1924.
Okay, so now eugenics is influencing immigration policy.
It did.
Okay.
The Immigration Restriction Act of 1924 was designed to limit immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. And completely bar immigration from Asia. And this was heavily influenced by eugenic arguments.
And how was eugenics used to justify these restrictions?
Well, proponents of the act argued that immigrants from these regions were biologically inferior. And they would weaken the American gene pool. And they used pseudoscientific claims about intelligence, criminality, and social deviance to justify their exclusionary policies.
So eugenics wasn't just about controlling who reproduces within a country. It was also about controlling who gets to enter the country in the first place.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Wow.
And unfortunately, the legacy of this act is still felt today in our debates about immigration and national identity.
This is so much to process.
It is.
We've gone from ancient Greece to the horrors of Nazi Germany to this unsettling realization that these ideas were deeply ingrained in American society.
It is a lot to unpack.
It is.
But I think this historical context is really crucial for understanding the broader implications of eugenics.
Yeah.
And its lasting impact on our world.
It is.
Yeah.
So we just finished talking about how the U.S. used eugenics to justify its immigration policies back in the 1920s.
Mm-hmm.
Did other countries follow similar paths?
They did.
Okay.
While the U.S. eugenics movement was prominent, it wasn't an isolated phenomenon.
Okay.
Even our neighbors to the north in Canada grappled with these ideas, although not on the same scale.
I always think of Canada as being more progressive, so I'm surprised to hear that eugenics had a foothold there.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
Their history with eugenics is different.
Okay.
2 provinces, Alberta and British Columbia, enacted sterilization laws in the late 1920s and early 1930s.
So was their focus on sterilizing people they deemed unfit, similar to what was happening in the U.S.?
Absolutely.
Okay.
These laws primarily focused on people with mental disorders.
Okay.
And historians estimate that over 2,800 Albertans and 200 British Columbians were sterilized.
Wow. That's a significant number of people.
It is.
I'm curious, what eventually caused the decline of the eugenics movement? So there's a specific event or just a gradual shift in thinking?
Well, the horrors of the Holocaust played a massive role in discrediting the movement as the world grappled with the atrocities committed by the Nazis. The true nature of eugenics, its inherent racism, and its potential for abuse became impossible to ignore.
It's like the world finally woke up to the monster that they had created and realized the danger of these ideas when taken to their extreme.
Yeah, that's a powerful way to put it.
Yeah.
And the global condemnation of Nazi Germany's actions really had a ripple effect after the war. Many countries began to repeal their sterilization laws and distance themselves from eugenic ideology.
So organizations like the Eugenics Record Office and the International Federation of Eugenics Organizations, did they just disappear after the war?
They did. They kind of faded away with the scientific community and the public turning against eugenics. They lost support and funding and eventually ceased to exist.
It's amazing how a concept that was once so widely accepted could become completely taboo in just a few decades.
It is. It really speaks to the power of social and political shifts to change how we perceive scientific ideas.
But while the organized eugenics movement declined, we can't assume that its legacy simply vanished.
That's right.
Okay.
The legacy of eugenics continues to shape how we think about science, ethics, and social justice, even in the 21st century.
Really in the 21st century? I thought we were way past all that.
I wish we were. But sadly, eugenic ideas haven't entirely disappeared. In fact, some could argue they've simply become more subtle. Often disguised by seemingly benevolent intentions.
So modern-day eugenics, what does that look like?
Well, it's more covert and less about explicit policies, like forced sterilization. For instance, there have been reports of forced sterilizations in countries like Peru and Uzbekistan.
Wow, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
I can't believe that forced sterilization is still happening in this day and age.
Yeah. Wow. It's a stark reminder that the fight for reproductive rights and bodily autonomy is far from over. But modern eugenics also goes beyond these overt acts of violence. It raises complex ethical questions about the use of new genetic technologies.
You're talking about things like CRISPR and genetic engineering.
Exactly.
I've heard about the amazing potential of these technologies.
Yeah.
But I guess there's a flip side of that coin, isn't there?
There is. While CRISPR and other gene editing tools offer incredible possibilities for curing diseases and preventing genetic disorders, they also open the door to a new era of eugenic concerns.
How so? I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around how gene editing, which seems like a positive advancement, could be connected to the horrors of the eugenics movement.
Well, think about it this way. These technologies raise the possibility of enhancing humans, not just treating diseases. What if we could use CRISPR to select for desirable traits like intelligence, athleticism, or even physical appearance?
I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
Suddenly we're back to those old ideas of designing a superior race, but this time with much more powerful tools.
Right.
It's like history repeating itself, but with a high-tech twist.
Yeah, and that's the fear, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we need to tread very carefully.
Yeah.
And have open and honest conversations about how we use these technologies. We need to be clear about what kind of future we want to create.
Yeah.
And make sure that these advancements benefit all of humanity,
yeah.
not just a select few.
You're right. We can't just blindly embrace these new technologies without considering the ethical implications.
Mm-hmm.
But who gets to decide what's ethical and what's not?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
We need to establish robust ethical frameworks.
Okay.
And open dialogues.
Right.
That involve a wide range of voices.
Okay.
Not just scientists and policymakers.
So we need ethicists,
yeah.
social scientists, and most importantly, the people who will be directly impacted by these technologies to have a seat at the table.
Precisely.
Okay.
We need to move away from that top-down elitist model that characterized the eugenics movement and embrace a more inclusive, democratic approach to science and technology.
It sounds like we need a serious upgrade to our ethical operating system if we're going to navigate this uncharted territory of genetic engineering. How do we even begin to grapple with such complex issues?
Well, I think education is one of the most powerful tools we have.
Okay.
We need to make sure that people understand the history of eugenics.
Right.
It's flawed science and its devastating consequences.
So you mean teaching people to be critical thinkers?
Yes.
And to question assumptions, especially when it comes to claims about genetics and human potential?
Exactly. We need to equip people with the critical thinking skills to recognize eugenic ideas, even when they're presented in a more subtle or palatable form.
Because let's face it, modern eugenics isn't as blatant as forced sterilization or concentration camps.
No.
It's more insidious.
Yeah.
It's operating in the shadows.
It is.
Yeah.
It can manifest in subtle forms of discrimination. Like denying health care to people with certain genetic conditions or promoting selective abortion based on genetic testing.
It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing.
We need to learn to see through those disguises and call out these ideas when we encounter them.
We do, and we can't just relegate these conversations to universities.
Sure.
We need to teach bioethics and the history of science in schools, starting at a young age.
So integrate these discussions into the mainstream curriculum.
Yes.
And make them part of the public discourse.
Exactly.
Wow.
The more we understand the ethical dilemmas of the past, the better prepared we'll be to make informed decisions about the future.
This conversation has been incredibly eye-opening.
Good.
I feel like I'm starting to grasp the complexities of eugenics and the challenges we face in this new era of genetic technologies.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, it's a complex and often uncomfortable topic.
Yes.
But it's one we can't afford to ignore.
We can't.
Okay, so we've covered the rise and fall of the eugenics movement, its global reach, the connection to racism, and the ethical dilemmas of modern genetics.
What else is there to unpack?
Well, we've explored a lot of territory.
We have.
But I think there's one more crucial point.
Oh, okay.
We need to address.
Okay. I'm all ears. What's the missing piece?
Well, we've talked extensively about the scientific and social factors that contributed to the rise of eugenics.
Right.
But at its core, eugenics was about power.
Power. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
Well, think about it.
Okay.
Who gets to decide what's normal?
Okay.
What's desirable? And who gets to control reproduction?
Right.
Eugenics was about using the veneer of science to justify existing hierarchies and reinforce the power of the dominant group.
So it wasn't just about bad science.
Right.
It was about using science as a tool to maintain control and suppress those deemed undesirable.
Precisely. Eugenics was a weapon of social control.
Wow.
Wielded by those in power to maintain their dominance and eliminate those they perceived as inferior.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It explains why eugenics often targeted marginalized groups. And those who were already vulnerable, they were seen as a threat to the existing power structure.
Exactly. And it reminds us that we always need to be vigilant about how power dynamics shape the way science is used and applied.
Because science is never truly neutral, is it?
You're absolutely right. Science is always embedded within a social context, shaped by the values, biases, and, yes, power dynamics of those who practice it.
So even in the 21st century, as we explore the frontiers of genetics and other cutting-edge technologies, we need to be aware of how those in power might be influencing these fields.
We do.
Okay.
We need to be asking some tough questions.
Okay, like what?
Who's benefiting from these technologies?
Right.
Who's being excluded and whose voices are being silenced?
It's like we need to be constantly checking our ethical blind spots, looking beyond the shiny promises of technological advancement, and considering the potential consequences for those who might be left behind or exploited.
Exactly. The legacy of eugenics reminds us that even the best intentions can be twisted to serve nefarious ends.
Yeah.
So we need to be critical thinkers, ask tough questions, and hold those in power accountable.
You've given us a lot to think about.
I know, it's a lot.
It is. This deep dive has really highlighted the responsibility that comes with scientific progress and how easily those advancements can be misused.
Absolutely.
It has been a fascinating and thought-provoking exploration.
It has.
And while we've covered a lot of ground,
yes,
I think it's valuable to delve deeper into specific cases that illustrate the complexities and nuances of eugenics history.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
What cases did you have in mind?
Let's start with Carrie Buck.
Okay.
A young woman.
Carrie Buck, that name rings a bell.
Yeah. She was the plaintiff in the landmark 1927 Supreme Court case.
Okay. Buck v. Bell.
Right. I remember reading about that case. It's
a
pivotal moment in the history of eugenics in the U.S.
It was. Carrie Buck was deemed feeble-minded.
Right.
And sterilized against her will.
It's just horrifying to think that the government had the power to make those kinds of decisions about people's lives and bodies.
Yeah.
All based on flawed science and societal prejudices.
It is a chilling example of how easily the legal system can be used to enforce eugenic policies.
Yeah.
And Carrie Buck's case highlights the deeply flawed and often arbitrary nature of those eugenic classifications.
So who got to decide who was feeble-minded or unfit, and what were their criteria?
That's precisely the problem.
Okay.
The criteria were incredibly vague and subjective.
Right.
Often rooted in social biases.
Right.
Rather than any real scientific evidence.
So it was really just a way to target people who didn't conform to society's expectations.
Exactly.
Those who were deemed different or undesirable. Wow.
And it's essential to remember that Carrie Buck's sterilization was part of a larger pattern of targeting marginalized groups. Particularly women, people of color, and the poor.
That's like eugenics was just another tool to reinforce existing power structures and maintain social control.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Wow.
And Carrie Buck's story is a tragic reminder of the human cost of these policies. The countless lives that were irrevocably altered by this movement.
It breaks my heart to think about those who were subjected to these injustices in the name of progress. Speaking of learning from the past, is there another case you wanted to share?
Yes.
That highlights the long shadow of eugenics.
The case of Elaine Riddick is one that we should examine.
Elaine Riddick. Okay.
She was an African-American woman who was sterilized in North Carolina in 1968.
1968. But I thought the eugenics movement was already on the decline by then.
It was. But sadly.
Eugenic practices continued in some parts of the U.S.
Wow.
Well into the late 20th century.
I had no idea that these practices persisted for so long.
They did.
Wow, what happened to Elaine Riddick?
So Elaine was only 14 years old.
14?
When she was sterilized.
Wow.
Without her consent or understanding.
Wow.
It happened after she gave birth to a child conceived through rape.
Oh my God, that is just beyond cruel.
It is.
To sterilize a child.
Yeah.
Especially after experiencing such a horrific trauma is unimaginable.
It's a horrifying example of how eugenic ideas were used to control and punish women. Particularly Black women, who were often seen as unfit mothers.
This case is just as shocking and disturbing as the Carrie Buck case.
Even
though it happened decades later.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder that the legacy of eugenics is still with us.
It is.
Lurking beneath the surface of our society.
You're right.
Yeah.
It's a painful history.
It is.
But one that we need to confront if we want to dismantle the systems.
And perpetuate these injustices.
These stories are incredibly powerful, and they really drive home the importance of understanding this history and being vigilant against the resurgence of eugenic ideas.
They do. They remind us that these ideas can reemerge in various guises, sometimes cloaked in scientific language. Or presented as solutions to social problems.
Right.
So we need to be critical thinkers. And question the motives behind those who claim to have like a simple fix for complex human issues.
So how do we do that?
Yeah.
How do we make sure that history doesn't repeat itself?
Yeah.
And that we don't fall prey to these dangerous ideologies?
Well, education is crucial.
Okay.
As we've discussed.
Yeah.
We need to teach people about the history of eugenics.
Right.
Its pseudo-scientific foundations.
Right.
And its devastating consequences.
But it's not just about memorizing historical facts, is it?
No.
It's about understanding the ethical and social implications of these ideas.
And how they continue to shape our world today.
Exactly. We need to cultivate critical thinking skills.
Right.
Encourage people to question assumptions and challenge authority, especially when it comes to issues of power and control over bodies.
And we need to make sure that everyone has a voice in these conversations, right?
Yes.
It can't just be scientists and policymakers dictating the terms of the debate.
Absolutely. We need to prioritize the voices of those who have been historically marginalized and silenced by eugenic policies. Their experiences and perspectives are essential for understanding the full scope of this history and preventing its recurrence.
It sounds like we're talking about a fundamental shift in how we approach science and technology.
Yeah.
A move toward a more inclusive and democratic model where everyone has a seat at the table.
That's precisely what we need.
Okay.
The legacy of eugenics is a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of challenging the status quo.
So, on a broader level, we're talking about working towards a more just and equitable society.
Yes.
Where everyone has equal opportunities, regardless of their genetic makeup or social standing.
Exactly. Eugenics thrived in an environment of inequality and prejudice.
Right.
So if we want to prevent the resurgence of such dangerous ideologies, we need to address the root causes of injustice and create a world where everyone has the chance to flourish.
It's not just about fighting against bad science.
No.
It's about fighting for social justice and human rights.
You've summed it up perfectly.
Wow.
The fight against eugenics is a fight for a better future for all of humanity.
Wow.
It's about reclaiming the power of science and using it to create a world where everyone is valued and respected regardless of their differences.
That's a powerful message to carry with us as we continue this deep dive.
It is. The history of eugenics is a sobering reminder that scientific progress without ethical awareness can have devastating consequences.
Before we wrap up this part of our exploration, I'm curious, what was the public's reaction to the eugenics movement as it was unfolding? Was there any opposition to these ideas, or were they widely accepted?
That's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that public opinion wasn't monolithic.
Okay.
While the eugenics movement gained considerable traction, particularly among the elite and in academic circles, there was also resistance and dissent.
So it wasn't a case of everyone blindly accepting these ideas?
Not at all.
Okay.
Opposition came from various quarters.
Okay.
Some religious groups saw eugenics as interfering with God's plan.
Okay.
While others, particularly those representing marginalized communities, recognize the inherent racism and classism embedded within the movement.
I can see how those who are being targeted by these policies
Yes.
would be the first to raise the alarm about their inherent injustice.
Exactly. They saw firsthand how eugenics was being used to justify discrimination and control. And they courageously spoke out against it.
Wow.
Even when their voices were silenced or dismissed.
Their stories are so important, reminding us that even in the face of seemingly overwhelming support for a particular idea, there are always those who stand up for what's right and challenge the status quo.
They are the unsung heroes of this history.
Yeah.
The ones who recognize the dangers of eugenics and fought against it, often at great personal risk.
Their resistance is an inspiration to us all, showing that even in the darkest of times, the fight for justice and equality continues.
It does.
Wow.
Their stories remind us that we must always be critical of those in power, question their motives, and challenge ideas that threaten to harm or marginalize entire groups of people.
Their legacy is one of courage and resilience, a testament to the power of speaking truth to power. Even when it's unpopular or dangerous.
Exactly. They remind us that we have a responsibility to learn from the past, to honor their struggles, and to continue the fight for a more just and equitable world.
It's a powerful reminder that the fight against eugenics is not just about debunking bad science. It's about upholding human dignity,
Yes.
and ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to live a full and meaningful life.
You've captured the essence of it perfectly.
Wow.
It's about recognizing the inherent worth of every individual, regardless of their genetic makeup or social standing, and creating a world where everyone has the chance to reach their full potential.
I think that's a perfect note to end on for this part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We've explored the complexities of eugenics from its historical roots to its modern manifestations, and we've learned about the importance of ethical awareness and vigilance in the face of scientific progress.
But we have.
We've also seen how individuals and communities resisted these harmful ideologies, paving the way for a more just and inclusive future.
They did. Their stories are a beacon of hope,
reminding us that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, the fight for human dignity and equality must continue.
Absolutely.
So we've been uncovering like this dark history of eugenics and its enduring impact. It's a story that spans centuries and continents, from ancient Greece to the horrors of Nazi Germany to the unsettling realization that these ideas persisted in various forms even after World War II.
Right.
It's a sobering reminder that we need to be constantly vigilant against the resurgence of eugenic thinking.
Yeah.
Even when it's disguised as progress or presented with seemingly good intentions. It's clear that education and critical thinking are crucial tools in this ongoing struggle.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up our deep dive, I'm curious, are there any specific examples or stories that you think really highlight the lasting legacy of eugenics and its impact on individuals and communities?
There are many, but one that stands out is the case of the Mississippi appendectomy.
Mississippi appendectomies. That sounds ominous.
Yeah.
I've never heard of this before.
Yeah,
What exactly happened?
It's a particularly chilling example of how eugenics targeted Black women in the U.S., often without their knowledge or consent. So from the 1940s through the 1960s, countless Black women in Mississippi, particularly those living in poverty, were subjected to unnecessary hysterectomies, often disguised as routine appendectomies.
That's horrific. How could medical professionals perform such procedures without informed consent?
Yeah, it was, a blatant violation of human rights. The underlying belief was that these women were unfit to reproduce. And their poverty was seen as a sign of genetic inferiority.
Wow.
Sterilization was deemed necessary to prevent them from having children.
It's a horrifying example of how racism and classism intertwined with eugenic ideas to justify medical abuse and social control.
And what's particularly insidious about these Mississippi appendectomies is that they were often performed under false pretenses. These women were told that they were having a simple appendectomy, when in fact they were being sterilized.
So they were robbed of their right to bodily autonomy and reproductive choice? Without even knowing what was happening to them.
Exactly. It's a chilling reminder of how easily power can be abused, especially when it comes to controlling the bodies and lives of marginalized women.
It's clear that the legacy of eugenics extends far beyond forced sterilization programs and into the realm of reproductive health care and bodily autonomy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This case raises crucial questions about who has access to health care, who controls that access, and how easily those in power can exploit their position to enforce their own ideologies.
These are questions that resonate deeply with contemporary debates about reproductive rights and social justice. It's like the ghosts of the eugenics movement are still haunting us. Reminding us of the fragility of those rights and the constant need to be vigilant.
You're right.
So what can we do to ensure that these horrific abuses of power don't happen again? What steps can we take to safeguard reproductive rights and bodily autonomy for everyone?
I think awareness is key. We need to educate ourselves and others about the history of reproductive coercion and the ways in which it has been used to control certain populations.
You're talking about having open and honest conversations about these issues, even when they're uncomfortable or challenging.
Exactly. We need to shed light on these dark chapters of history, not to dwell in the past, but to learn from it and prevent its repetition.
And beyond raising awareness, what else can we do to make a tangible difference?
Well, we need to advocate for strong legal protections that safeguard reproductive rights and bodily autonomy for all. We need to support organizations that are working to ensure access to comprehensive reproductive health care, including contraception, abortion care, and comprehensive sex education.
So it's about combining education with action.
Yes.
Using our voices and our resources to challenge injustice and support those who are most vulnerable to these abuses of power.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that reproductive justice is a fundamental human right.
Right.
And it's about working tirelessly to protect that right for everyone.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener.
Good.
You've explored the dark history of eugenics, its insidious spread, and its enduring impact on our world.
Right.
But we've also seen how individuals and communities resisted these harmful ideologies, fighting for justice and equality.
They did.
Their courage and resilience remind us that we have a responsibility to learn from the past and to work towards a future where every individual is valued and respected, regardless of their genetic makeup or social standing.
That's right.
This has been such a thought-provoking conversation.
It has been.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and insights.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us.
Yes.
On this journey through the complex and often unsettling history of eugenics.
Yeah, it's been quite a ride.
We hope this deep dive has inspired you to think critically about the role of science in society.
Absolutely.
And to be vigilant against the resurgence of these dangerous ideologies. Remember, knowledge is power.
Yes.
And by understanding the past, we can create a better future for all.
Absolutely.